Do you have children, or do you get a beautiful opportunity to work with children every now and again, whether it's on a daily basis or maybe just on the weekend because you volunteer as part of coaching the youth or ministering to the youth, whatever it is? If you get to work with children and you are passionate about working with young people, or maybe you've always just had a deep desire to work as part of the volunteer team for the Unlearning Children Foundation, whatever it is, this episode is going to really help you to understand how you can be a phenomenal beacon of hope, a shining light towards supporting children that are transitioning. Now, you'll know based on the work that we do at the Unlearners that transitions are a big part of the work that we support our clients on. So when our clients are changing and they're going from one way of doing things to another, and there's a need for this beautiful psychological safety there, but also there's a lot of anxiety. Now, individuals, especially in this case, children, go through that exact same thing. So there are a lot of different changes that children will go through, whether it's changing to the next grade, whether it's moving homes, losing a parent, so many different things that will need a child or a young person to let go of one way of doing things and unlearn it and then transition into something else. And it can often feel so scary to make that big leap or that big jump. And so today's episode is going to help you whatever case you are looking at this from. And then the main target, you'll see, because this is part of the Future Smart Parent podcast, Jude over there, who is a lovely friend of mine, someone I deeply admire and love, she really ushers in the conversation from a parent perspective. But you'll also see that wherever it is you fall on the spectrum, you can still support a child with a transition. Now, I want you to call to mind as we start this episode, a child, a young person, or children that you are supporting, and how this episode is going to help you walk away with very practical steps and tips and tools that you can, from tomorrow or from today after this episode, you can start to actually practice to support those children. Because I always say that the capacity to do change really well is one of the biggest skills that we can have in our backpacks, or we can have in our pockets, whichever you feel most comfortable with. So when we have that capacity to do change really well from the time we're young, then we grow into adults that are not afraid of transitioning, that are not afraid of doing things differently, or not afraid of going into a new area with new people or trying something new, which is where most of us find ourselves as adults. We're so afraid of transitioning and changing. So I hope that this episode is an absolute gem for you. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier on, if you do have a deep desire to support us as part of the Unlearning Children Foundation, where we support beautiful young children in grade 8 and grade 9 across various schools in Africa to really reimagine mental health and not to turn to suicide when things get rough and they are feeling unsure and anxious. Because whether you know it or not, Africa actually has the highest suicide rates in the world. And so the Unlearning Children Foundation intends to serve children so that they know how to do change. And when things get crazy in life, like they sometimes do, then those beautiful children know what to do. So if you do want to be a part of that journey, please do reach out to us. You can go over to theunlearners.com, sign up as a volunteer or even as a partner. We're always looking for phenomenal partners to support the great work that we do, increase the impact so we all get to make an impact towards this wonderful cause. So do reach out if you'd love to be a part of the Unlearning Children Foundation. And join us for what we call our Unlearning Days, which are always really fun because you get to spend all of this time with young people and having the conversation around mental health. It's super valuable. All right, back to today's episode. I hope you enjoy. The episode is titled Helping Our Kids Through Transitions and is a conversation that was originally part of the Future Smart Parent podcast, and Jude Foulston was the interviewer there. So enjoy the podcast, and I hope it's super valuable to you. The Unlearners. Learn, change. Learn, change. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.
Welcome to the Future Smart Parent podcast, a place where my mom explores how to help us kids develop a new set of skills we need to face the future with confidence.
I'm Jude Foulston, an introverted mom trying my best to raise kids who are happy and confident, kids who embrace all that makes them unique while preparing them for an exciting future that really looks nothing like the world we grew up in. I believe there's a whole set of skills that our kids aren't being taught. These skills will be critical for them to develop in order to thrive in the future. It's up to us as parents to help them develop these skills. The Future Smart Parent podcast provides resources for parents and kids who want to be ready for all the ways in which the future is going to be different from today. We will explore this future together, bringing insights from top futurists, resources from smart people working on making our lives better, and most importantly, stories of parents who are parenting a little differently, yet very much intentionally for a changing world. So join me as we explore how we can be future smart parents raising future smart kids. Welcome to today's episode of the Future Smart Parent podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Zanele Njapa. Zanele has built her profile as one of Africa's brightest Zanele organizational change and learning influencers. Known to her awesome clients as the UnLearning Lady, past primary school teacher Zanele Njapa is a global leading voice on using key unlearning principles to help companies such as Visa, Coca-Cola, Philip Morris, the South African Reserve Bank, Deloitte, VW, and Discovery build cultures that support change and transformation. So welcome, Zanele.
Thank you so much, Jude. It's amazing to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yay! So the reason that I asked Zanele to join us on this podcast episode today is to have the conversation around transitions, and specifically to help us parents help our kids and ourselves through the many transitions that we all go through. As many of the Future Smart Parent community might know, our family recently semigrated from KZN to a really small little seaside village in the Eastern Cape. And if any of our South African listeners know of Kenton-on-Sea, you'll know what a magical place we now call home. Many afternoons are spent on the beach. Our kids have started at a new school that is really in line with our educational values. They get to walk to the shops on their own. They go fishing with their grandpa, hang out with their cousins. It's magical, right?
Yeah.
Well, wrong. They are also both really battling. They miss our home. They miss their friends. My little one even tells me that it's not green enough here because in the Eastern Cape, we don't get nearly as much rain as KZN does. So, yeah, I won't lie. I wasn't expecting it to be this difficult, both for the kids and my husband and I. It's been hard to manage all of our emotions. Of course, there's been a lot of moments of pure joy. And there's lots of things that, of course, we love about being here and wouldn't change it. But fundamentally, there are, I think, more sad than happy to be here right now. So knowing what I know about change being one of the very few constant things that we have in our lives, I've never been afraid of change and putting our kids through change because, build resilience, help them learn to be adaptive, all of those things. But what I have realized since this big move is that what I've perhaps not done or had the skills to do is actually give them the practical skills that they need to go through change. So, yeah, I mean, this episode isn't just for families who are relocating, although I think that there's a whole heap of those. But, well, Zanele, change or transitions can look like anything, right? Moving new schools, welcoming new siblings, those sort of things. So perhaps the bottom line, I guess, is change is everywhere. So after that long introduction, today I'm just really grateful and privileged to be able to call in the advice and wisdom of my friend and associate, Zanele Njapa. the UnLearning Lady. Welcome. Yeah, so Zanele, a podcast on helping with transitions didn't ever cross my mind, to be honest. But I have been caught completely off guard. So I don't know. I was thinking to start from the beginning.
Good place to start.
Yeah. Maybe we can start with some of the challenges that parents face when helping their kids through transitions, or even a better place to start of how exactly do transitions impact us. Is that a good place to start?
I think that's a really good place to start, because then I think that what parents can start to do as we have this conversation is they can start to connect emotionally and understand whether this is the place where they currently find themselves, and then also maybe reflect on whether they have been in this place before, because I think that emotions are always a really great indicator of what to do next. Is, something people often say is follow your emotions and use your emotions as a kind of scale or guide. So with
Mm.
that being said, I just remembered, as you were introducing, as a teacher, I would always watch with such great interest when children came into a grade and then they left. And there would always be this interest, especially as they wrapped up the year and then progressed, and then watching the next group come in, but also the energy that they came into the new environment with would be such an indicator of how they were almost shifted into the next phase of what they needed to do. And then I think
Mm-hmm.
every single teacher would see that. So the reason why I mention that is because the way that I approach transitions in the work that I do
Mm.
is in an almost two level spectrum, or two different things, or two different parts to it. It's that letting go and that grabbing hold. So it's those
Mm.
two different parts that exist in tandem that make up a transition. But here's what I think is really important, Jude, that I think parents need to keep in mind, is that with a transition being made up of letting go and grabbing hold, in my work, what I've seen is that the letting go is the hardest. And here's why.
Mm.
Because, and going back to the story you were telling, which I thought was so beautiful, what children and just generally human beings do is we attach every single thing that happens to us most of the time and the identity we hold at the time to what's happening. So, for example, this is who I am. My name is Sipho. I live in this neighborhood. I've got a friend next door whose name is Jack. That's who I am. And so
Mm.
when mom says, let's move schools, and now I don't even know the child next door, then who am I? That's the big conversation that happens in our heads during change, because we have taken every experience, we have taken everything that we know about ourselves, and we've said that this is who I am. And oftentimes, it's just that tiny understanding, or that shift in understanding, that makes the big difference to say, oh, okay. So it's an identity question that we're actually dealing with at the end of the day. And maybe to close off this response to your question, a really great resource that parents might find really valuable is Managing Transitions, a book by William Bridges.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic book. Really is one of the forebears or the big thinkers around transitions. And one of the analogies that he shares is that the process of transitioning or change is really made up of two different things, and we don't realize that. He says that there is the change, which is the systemic, technical part of it. So moving, it's the
Mm.
changing the school, it's the moving into grade 12. So that's the part of it that's tangible, the part that's the tick box. And
Yeah.
then he says the transition is the psychological part of it. It's the emotional part of it. It's the part that happens in the heart, the part that we
Mm.
don't necessarily see, that really says, has the person been able to let go and then grab hold? And oftentimes when we find we get that resistance, it's because the person has changed, yes, but they haven't actually transitioned.
Yeah, that's interesting because I mean, my little guy, he keeps talking about his best friend who was our
Oh, yeah.
neighbor, and the interesting thing is that they actually used to fight. They weren't that tight. I mean, they had moments where they were as thick as thieves, but they actually did also used to fight quite often. But he doesn't see that. He just remembers this really tight best friend. He's making plans to do all sorts of things with this little oak. when he goes back. And then also what you're saying is, so he's also, his underlying emotion at the moment is anger. So it's also something that we don't, it's easy to kind of put them into a new school and to give them the new backpack and to get excited about lunchboxes, but it's not so easy to deal with the anger. Like, it's a real anger that he's feeling. So I guess my next question is sort of, what are the practical tips and strategies that, apart from reading the book that you recommended, so thank you, but what are the tips that we can use to help our kids, I guess, prepare, and then to adjust to new transitions? I think looking back, I was so excited about this move. I knew deep in my soul that this move was going to be good for our family, but I perhaps didn't give them enough space, the kids enough space to kind of grieve or to prepare, or I don't know. What is your advice there?
Yeah, I love that you said the word grieve, Jude, because that is one of the two things that I think are really valuable for us to give ourselves, but also to use to support those in our care when it comes to transitions. So, really, two key steps here. And the first one is grieving. And I'll
Mm,
explain what I mean by grieving just now. And the second one is transparency. So if you think about going right back to the beginning, because I want parents to really create that beautiful golden thread so that everything makes sense with everything that I've shared. If you think about a transition as letting go and grabbing hold, and there almost being this lost identity, it's the exact same thing we go through when we lose someone we care deeply about, because we're no longer ever actually going to see them again, not just because
yeah,
we've moved the area that we live in. And
yeah.
what human beings actually understand at that level is that there are practices that help us to make that transition. So depending on your religion, your beliefs, where in the world you're based, there are different things that different spiritual communities do to honor the person I used to be and then welcome who I'm now becoming. So the grieving process is really that part of honoring who I used to be. And this is what I find many of us don't do. A lot of us we're just going, especially in our parenting, we're just going and we don't make the space for our children to grieve. And by grieve, I
Mm,
really mean validation, validating those emotions instead of maybe nullifying them and saying, no, but this is where we are now. Come on, get with the program. This is what we're
yeah.
doing now. So, validating those emotions really means allowing the child to go through what's known as the 5 stages of grief. Another really great framework that parents can tap into. And I love that you said anger, because anger is really the second stage of those 5 stages. Denial is the
Mhm,
first, where they're going, you know what, we're going to go back. I know we're going to go back. It's temporary. We don't really, this is not my new reality. This is not who I am. And then the anger comes in when they've realized that it's been going on for a while and there's a good
mm,
chance that things are not going to change. Maybe dad's not going to come back, or we're not going to move to that new place. The
mm,
anger then is them almost finding a way to understand what's really going on here and how it's going to impact them. And we'll answer that question in step number 2. The third stage of this is the bargaining. And this is where they start to go, but mom, can we maybe move back there and then we'll do this thing for you that you really like. So it's
yeah.
them almost finding a way to just get back to what they used to know. So that's something you can expect maybe in the coming months or so. And then the beautiful thing is that that means they're getting closer to the acceptance, which is stage 5. Before that, though, is a period of depression. So, what's known as depression, it's not necessarily clinical depression, but all that it
Mm,
means is a child or an individual is going through that place where they begin to almost withdraw. This is when they start to do their internal work of recalibrating to say, okay, I have now almost made peace with the way things are. And I realize that I have tried what I've tried, and it's not giving me the results I thought I was going to get. And you may see an actual withdrawal. So you may see
mm,
less talking, you may see less interaction. One of the things you really want to do is be there, and be constant, be someone that when the child does get to step number 5, which is acceptance, you
mm,
are there. They can come back. They can show you that they're now on board, and you'll see it, because children are really great at not being able to hide their emotions at that
yeah.
stage. but they will show you. And so, step number 5, and the interesting thing about acceptance as it's taught is that it's not necessarily I'm on board, but it's I'm just going to make it work. And
Mm.
sometimes the reasonings for it are not necessarily what you want. It's not that they are buying in and they're all in and they understand. That's why step number 2 is important. So that's grieving, taking the individual, taking the child, taking the family through that process of validating those emotions. And maybe to put that into a very practical way of seeing it before we jump into step number 2 is having
Yeah.
those conversations and saying, okay, what did you used to miss about that? What was really great? And another thing you can do as well is because parents tend to be unicorned. And what I mean by that is that there's a halo effect that happens around you as a parent, that you're not experiencing what we are experiencing. You don't feel like you miss the old place. You're not quite going through the emotions that I'm going through. So maybe having a little bit of time that's not necessarily dedicated to it, and you can choose how you do this, to say, what are some of the things that you used to love about the old house? What are some of the
Mm.
things that we can do and bring in? And we'll talk about that in step number 2. But validating those emotions to say it's okay to feel that way because I feel it as well. And maybe even sharing, how do you
Yeah.
feel as a parent? What are some of the things you feel you had to let go of as well? And how have you then recalibrated? So that's the grieving part of it. And I'm happy to double click into it, Jude, because I know that that one tends to spark a lot of conversation. Step number 2 then is a beautiful accompaniment to validating those emotions. Because what you find if you approach the grieving process as a nostalgic process that tends to drag on, then you open up a bit of a can of worms, and then things, start to
Yeah.
work against what you'd hoped.
Yes, I know I'm interrupting the episode, but it's just to let you know that if you're enjoying this, you are going to love our weekly newsletter. So every single week, I'm sending you tips, tools, insights to help you on your unlearning journey, but also I'm sending you updates about events, our various courses that are also going to support you as you learn, change, and grow. Okay, now, finally, let's get back to the episode.
So step number 2 is a really beautiful accompaniment to that. In that, step number 2 is transparency. And by transparency, what I mean here is one of the things you spoke about that I smiled when you mentioned was that in your soul, you knew that this move was going to be really good, or you suspected that this move was going to be really good. But what I think is really important for us to understand is that in the child's soul, that
Mm.
move doesn't necessarily make sense. And so our job then as the individuals who are in the position we are in is how do you connect it to the child's soul? And that's what the transparency is really about. It's about connecting the things that the child is really after. Maybe it's the friendship. Maybe it's so double clicking. Once we've had that conversation about what you miss, what does that tell me about what you really want? Is it
Mm.
friendship? Is it opportunities to gather with other children? Is it a place to play? So that it's less about what you used to be and more about the things that are filling your cup at the end of the
Mm.
day, and finding out what some
Mm.
of those are, and not necessarily recreating, but finding ways to make sure that those aspects are peppered here and there so that they still connect. And this is a really great one to practice before a big transition. So finding
Mhm.
ways to say, okay, now that this is about to happen, what are the different ways that when we do move, you could be looking forward to such and such? Now that we are leaving, what are the different things that we could find on the other side that would really help you to process this just a little bit better, or that you are looking forward to as we make the transition from where we are? And then looking at
Mhm.
ways of how we supply those things, how we put those things into practice, but then how do we almost web those things into the day to day so that the child is reminded that the transition is also for me? Because
Mm.
then it starts to look like it's a mom thing, it's a dad thing, it's an uncle thing, it's a grandpa thing. But how
Mm.
does it also
Mm.
become for them? In this new place, guess what? You now get access to this that you didn't have before. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that cool? But then again, it needs to be something that is truly of value to them and that they've actually been able to verify that value. Because sometimes we go,
Mhm.
oh, here's the carrot. Don't you like it? But they haven't actually been able to engage with the carrot. and see the value of this thing in their lives and then go, oh my goodness, you know what? Back in
Yeah.
KZN, there is no way I would have been able to do something like that. So that's where I'll stop with that, because it can go on forever. But I think that grieving and transparency are really two great places to start.
I remember you and I having a conversation a while ago about transitions, and the analogy that you used really stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
But it was the one of the trapeze artist, right?
Yes.
And the letting go, and then the grabbing on, and there was a safety net. So I would love you just to share that analogy again for me to get my head around it, but for our listeners too. And then I think what I'm hearing is that what you were just speaking about now is just almost being that safety net of the letting go, but then also the grabbing on. And that is what a transition really is. There's no easy way through this, as much as, I mean, when we started this journey, I was like, oh my goodness, there's nothing that, like, this is a magical place. It's everything is right about it, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, I was wrong. But yeah, can you just remind me of that analogy that you used? And I'm right, correct, that it's just providing that safety net of letting go and grabbing forward at the same time. Yeah.
Yes, beautifully said, Jude. And that analogy, I think, is a beautiful way for parents to see it, but for anyone really to start to see the picture of what's going on during a transition. So if we think about trapeze artists, and for those of us who are not too familiar with that concept, these are the individuals that are flying through the air on bars, catching each other's hands and then swinging across, and really scary to watch, but usually a part of a circus act, just to give everyone a bit of context. Now, when we think about just that very almost segmented process of what a trapeze artist goes through, this individual starts off either on a ledge of some sort or holding onto a bar or someone's hands. They're swinging there for a good few seconds as they get their momentum. And you want to almost think about how that swinging or being on that ledge is a sturdy place, is a place of safety. It's something you've gotten used to. And then all of a sudden, you need to build up the momentum to then swing over and catch whatever you need to catch on the other side. And the thing is, and I did some really interesting research into this, the thing is, trapeze artists are encouraged never to leave where they are until they feel like the context is safe enough for them to then jump. So they will swing as many times as they need to get the momentum that they need and then jump, which is one of the things I often advise, that if you're transitioning, put in place what you can, so that you've built that sense of psychological safety, which is another huge concept in this space. So then they jump through the air and they do a flip or whatever they do, and then they catch on the other side. But a big part of that then, and I think that this is where the interest comes in, is that trust that something is going to be there when I get there. I either need to see it, I need to believe it, I need to have it in the back of my mind. But a big part of me jumping is knowing that when I get there, someone's going to catch me. There's going to be a rope. There's going to be a ledge that I'm going to be able to grab hold onto and be okay on the other side in order to progress. So I think all of those little parts of that analogy tell us exactly how much of emotional and psychological work needs to be done in that process in order to create that psychological safety that's needed. The other thing that you touched on, Jude, maybe to end this off, is the safety net that is at the bottom, which is such a beautiful thing. And I wanted to just share another story as well. But trapeze artists are trained with that net at the bottom. And even at professional level, it is often advised. So at the circus, you will see that there is a net there, even though these people have been doing it for years. Still, we need to know that there is a way for us to be okay if things don't work out. But yes, it doesn't mean we don't train ourselves to get better, train ourselves to improve. But just knowing that if somehow something goes wrong, if I slip, if I'm a bit nervous and my hands are just a little bit sweaty on that day, I'm going to be okay. I'm not going to crash and burn. So I can try my best in an environment that's built to support me, I think is the big idea there. So I love that you prompted that because it's quite loaded.
Suppose also with the safety net is allowing those emotions to be, just to move through the process, because and to have these conversations, right? Because I'm just thinking, I mean, whether the transition is moving provinces, moving continents, whether it's starting a new school, whether it's starting a new job, whether it's starting a new relationship, even, we will always go through transitions. And I mean, I know part of your role is to sort of mentor and coach adults through transitions. So I'm presuming that we get better and better at transitions. We can get better and better at transitions. Am I right?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can get better and better.
And so part of the safety net that we as a family can provide is talking our kids through the fact that this is a transition and that we're learning to go through these transitions and that we're always going to be going through transitions. This one that our family is going through, yes, it's a big one and there's lots of learning and there's lots of emotion. So it's not always this tough, but it's a good conversation for us to be having. Just that this is what it is. And you're allowed to be feeling angry and all of the stuff that we've spoken about, but to remind them of the good things at the same time that they've got here. Zanele, thank you. I think that you've given me a lot to think about. Unfortunately, there's no magic wand, right? I know for myself, there's lots of mistakes that we've made in this process. I mean, do you think that there are like common mistakes that people make in transitions?
Yes, absolutely, especially in this one or in similar transitions. But
Yeah.
before I go into this one, I did just want to say to what you were mentioning just now, Jude, is that a big part of it is modeling. It's a
Mm.
huge part of teaching what it looks like to transition in the way that you think is a healthy way to do it. Because, I mean, from infancy, children learn how to respond to trigger points like change, like money, intimacy, just from watching how
Mm.
we go through it. And I think a great reflection for parents to do is to ask themselves, or maybe do a little tiny audit, to ask yourself and observe what your change behavior has been. What has been your language around the move? What has been your responses? Has anything in your relationship, either as spouses, changed as you've gone through the transition? Because that also triggers the idea of, oh, when we change, mom and dad don't get along, or when we change, the dog
Mm.
dies, or anything like that, they can attach to the change itself. So modeling tiny things like how you adapt to cereal that's changed, that's now different. Do you lose your cool because now the cereal that you absolutely love is not there? Those
Mm.
tiny things
Mm.
that happen on a day to day teach them how to respond to change. When things change, do we lose our cool? Do we look for the good? Do we embrace it? All of those types of things are really important. So that aside, then
And
what I will, uh-huh.
I'm gonna jump into you in there because I'm actually thinking of Gav yesterday. He was so frustrated, and I mean, the poor guy, he's being frustrated. But then at the end of it, he kind of will sing a song and kind of get on with it. And I suppose it's
Uh-huh.
good for the kids to see. I mean, he woke up this morning singing, and like last night, he was so frustrated trying to just get something to work. And then this morning, he's like, "It's a new guy, a new day, everyone," and he puts the music up. And I suppose
Oh.
that's far better modeling than what I do. That they see his frustration. Oh, I get goosebumps now. But then they also see him waking up and ready to start the next day, and that we get another day to try, right?
Yes, yes. And I think that leads me directly, actually, Jude, to the question you just asked. The common mistakes we
Mm.
make very, very often in this context. And the common mistake that I find, and it's just this one, is that we expect it to be painless. We
Mm.
know, but then we still put out the expectation that it's going to be as painless as is possible. And then the second part to that is that we teach we teach that it's going to be painless, or at least we teach that it won't not be painful. Does that make sense? Like, so we
Yeah.
don't necessarily maybe teach that it won't be painless, but we don't at least teach that it's going to be hard. And that
Yeah.
for me is something we can change beautifully as well, because there's so many things that we can do. And I'll give a quick example here. I remember teaching the life cycle of a butterfly at school. It's a huge favorite for children, because not only does it teach them how the butterfly progresses, and they also maybe introduce concepts like death as well in a very gentle way, but also what it does, especially when we get to that point where the butterfly actually has to struggle out of the cocoon on its own. Because if it gets help, it's not going to survive, and its beautiful little wings are not going to be strong enough. Just the indication, especially with if you've got children that love to observe nature, finding ways to help them to understand that transitions are not only a part of their lives, but they're a part of how everything works. So now let's look at how the butterfly makes the most of the transition. Ooh, are your wings getting stronger? What did you go through today that made your wings just a little bit stronger than they were yesterday? Just so that they understand that I'm not alone in the process of having to let go of something that I really loved and then grabbing hold of something new. And it helps them create that beautiful parallel that they can then relate themselves to, not just mom and dad, not just uncle and aunt, but they can relate themselves to the world that's constantly changing. And then one day in 20 years time, when their company is, going through all sorts of things and they have to shift, they're okay, because they've learned that it doesn't have to be painless. It's the effort, it's the challenge that really grows us, that helps us to expand and to learn.
I love that. I love that. I'm definitely going to use the butterfly analogy with my kids and remind all of us that our wings are just getting stronger. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Zanele, thank you. Thank you so much. As we've said, transitions are for everyone. I know that it's not just youngsters. Your final words, can you just share a little bit about what you do, kind of how you help bigger people in the world of work, and where we can find you? I will put a link to all of your details, but if you can just wrap up with how you help us bigger people as well.
Thank you so much, Jude. So the way that I help organizations, specifically teams within those organizations, is I help them build a culture of learning, unlearning, and relearning. So what that means is I'll come in there, and whether it's a keynote address, whether it's a long-term intervention that the company has decided that they need, because their people need to build this muscle, or maybe to use the term we use, their wings need to get a little bit stronger so that they can approach change in a more optimistic way. Because at the end of the day, what we're seeing a lot of today is that everyone is change fatigued. So a lot of organizations are going, how do we make our people better at change? So that's what I will come in and do. We'll design something collaboratively depending on what you need. The best place for people to find my work is on my website, theunlearners.com, or just find me directly on Google. I live on Instagram, so that's also another place to find me, at Zanele_Njap.
Thank you, my friends. I just love having you in my world. So thank you. And we will chat again soon. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Wishing you all of the best. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you and the work that you do to help your amazing community.
Thanks for listening to the Future Smart Parent podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation. As always, you can head over to www.futuresmartparent.com to sign up to our email list, as well as check out all the links and resources in the show notes. That's all for this episode. See you next time.
The Unlearners. Learn, change. Learn, change. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. The Unlearners. Learn, change, grow.